Before NASA launched its first astronauts, America was already sending men to the edge of space, and they were doing it in a rocket plane. The North American X-15 first flew in 1959. It wasn't launched from a pad. It was dropped from the belly of a B-52 bomber at high altitude. The X-15 reached speeds of Mach 6.7, nearly 7 times the speed of sound. And on several flights, it climbed past the Kármán line, the 100-kilometer boundary recognized as the beginning of space. 12 pilots flew the X-15 across 199 flights. 8 of them crossed into space. One of those pilots was Neil Armstrong, the same man who would later set foot on the moon. America's first through-crewed spacecraft was Project Mercury, which ran from 1958 to 1963. The Mercury capsule was small, extraordinarily small. It was a cone-shaped metal pod just under 3 meters tall, designed to hold a single astronaut in a tight seat. The astronauts couldn't stand, couldn't move around, and in the early flights had very little control over what the vehicle actually did. Engineers on the ground handled most of it. Mercury flew 6 crewed missions. Alan Shepard became the first American in space on May 5, 1961, just 23 days after the Soviet Union had sent Yuri Gagarin up. His flight lasted 15 minutes and 22 seconds. The Mercury program laid the foundation for everything that came after it. It was where America learned how to do space. Project Gemini flew from 1961 to 1966 and was designed with a very specific mission in mind. Figure out everything NASA needed to know before attempting the moon. That meant spacewalks, orbital rendezvous, docking with other vehicles, and long-duration space flights. The Gemini capsule was bigger than Mercury and carried 2 astronauts. It was the first American spacecraft that gave crews real manual control. It flew 10 crewed missions and achieved every major goal it was given. Ed White conducted the first American spacewalk during Gemini 4 in 1965, and Gemini 14 set an endurance record of nearly 14 days in space, longer than any Apollo lunar mission would require. By the time Gemini was done, NASA had the knowledge it needed. The moon was the next step. Apollo is arguably the greatest engineering achievement in human history. The program had 2 spacecraft at its core, the Command Module and the Lunar Module. The Command Module was the capsule that 3 astronauts launched from Earth in, traveled to the moon in, and returned home in. It was cone-shaped, roughly 3.9 meters wide at its base, and could hold a crew of 3 for up to 12 days. It was built to survive re-entry from lunar return speeds. The lunar module had 2 stages. A descent stage that carried the crew to the lunar surface and acted as a launch pad, and an ascent stage that brought the astronauts back up to rendezvous with the command module waiting in orbit. Apollo flew 11 crewed missions between 1968 and 1972. Apollo 8 carried humans to lunar orbit for the first time. Apollo 11 landed on the moon on July 20, 1969. 6 missions in total landed on the lunar surface, with 12 humans walking on the moon between 1969 and 1972. Apollo 13 never landed. An oxygen tank explosion crippled the service module, and the crew used the lunar module as a lifeboat to survive the journey home. In 1981, America flew a spacecraft unlike anything that had ever existed. The Space Shuttle was a reusable crewed vehicle, the first in history. It launched like a rocket, operated in orbit like a spacecraft, and landed like a glider. It had no engines during re-entry. The commander and pilot glided it into a runway. The orbiter itself could carry up to 8 crew members on a massive cargo bay that could hold a school bus. It deployed satellites, launched interplanetary probes, conducted science experiments, and was the vehicle that built the International Space Station piece by piece. 5 orbiters flew: Columbia, Challenger, Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavour. A 6th orbiter, Enterprise, was built purely for atmospheric approach and landing tests. Enterprise never reached space. The program flew 135 missions over 30 years from 1981 to 2011. Orion is NASA's spacecraft for deep space. Orion is built for going to the moon and eventually beyond. It's a larger capsule capable of carrying 4 crew members and built to survive the radiation environment of deep space and the higher energy re-entry speeds of a return from lunar distance. Orion flew its first uncrewed test in 2014. Its second uncrewed flight, Artemis 1, in late 2022 sent it around the moon and back without a crew. That mission tested everything: the deep space environment, the thermal protection system, the communication systems, the splashdown, and it passed. The just concluded and successful Artemis 2 mission is the first time Orion carried a crew. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin climbed into a small spherical capsule, was launched atop an R-7 rocket, and completed 1 full orbit of Earth in 108 minutes. He was the first human in space, and he used the Vostok capsule. The Vostok capsule was a 2.3 meter sphere. Vostok flew 6 crewed missions between 1961 and 1963. Valentina Tereshkova flew Vostok 6 in June 1963. She was the first woman in space, a record she held for 19 years. By 1964, the Soviets were under pressure. Gemini was coming. The Soviets needed to look like they were ahead. Voskhod was the solution. Voskhod 1 flew 3 cosmonauts in October 1964. The first multi-person crew in space. Voskhod 2 in March 1965 carried Alexei Leonov on the first spacewalk in history. Leonov floated outside the spacecraft for about 12 minutes. The next Russian spacecraft, Soyuz, has been flying since 1967. It is still flying today. No crewed spacecraft in history has had a longer operational life. Other Russian spacecrafts include the LK Lunar Lander. Then the L-1 was the Soviet spacecraft intended to carry cosmonauts around the moon. Then there was the TKS that was designed in the 1960s as a military transport for the Artemis space station program. The TKS flew 4 times, all uncrewed, between 1977 and 1985. China is not left out. In October 2003, Yang Liwei climbed into a spacecraft called Shenzhou 5 and became the first Chinese person in space. China became the third nation in history to independently develop the capability to send humans to orbit. Since 2003, Shenzhou has carried Chinese taikonauts on missions of increasing duration and ambition. Shenzhou continues to fly today, regularly carrying crews to China's space station. There was also Hermes. Hermes was a small crewed space plane designed by France and developed under the European Space Agency. It would carry 3 crew members. Hermes never flew. That is every spacecraft I could find. I know I missed a couple. Leave them in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already subscribed, subscribe. There's a lot more coming.